Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Constantine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be talking about how to apply for grants with a particular focus at the end about applying for fellowships. So if you're not familiar with the Online Writing Center's other offerings, we offer these webinars based on a combination of student requests, faculty requests, and our observations on what students are asking for help with. And if there's something that you don't see in our existing offerings that you would like to request, please write us a note, let us know what you'd like to see, and whether that is something that is occurring mid-semester, where we might create a special resource for you or point you to an existing one, or something that we integrate into the following semester's feedback. If there's something that would really help you in your studies that is writing related, please let us know. We would like to be able to be delivering what you yourself need as a student. These webinars, the Intro to Grant Writing webinars, are a result of student requests. A few preliminaries if you are new to the Online Writing Center. We work through students through a variety of channels, including through webinars such as this, through creating resources such as templates, and providing feedback on papers and other pieces of writing. So whatever the genre, and whether it is a ACU class assignment, or if you're applying to something externally, or just preparing your materials to go on the job market, you are welcome to make an appointment with us for feedback. These come in two basic varieties. We have real-time appointments, mainly done through phone or Zoom, depending on your request, whether you want to be able to see the screen or be able to just focus on what you're hearing, and asynchronous appointments, where you send in your draft, we look at it, we send you feedback generally within 24 hours. We do also have a sort of a real-time office hour thing that you can drop into for some days, where you can ask questions more on the fly. But in general, if you're looking for lengthier feedback, go ahead and sign up for an appointment. If something really quick like, oh, is this kind of resource, or is this formatted right, or does this title match APA style guidelines, just send us an email for that and we're happy to respond to them. All right, again, if you sign up for an asynchronous appointment, the turnaround is going to be within 24 hours. Just make sure you upload a copy of your draft by that time, because we do need to have a draft in hand to look at it. And if you sign up for an appointment and we don't have a draft or any word from you saying, oh, hey, it's coming right away, I'll just be 10 minutes late, then your appointment might get marked as late, as I was missed. And if you get too many missed appointments, more than 2 per term, then we have to put you on the list of students who have missed appointments, and then you need to write us to ask to get off that list. That's designed to let everyone have access to appointments. So if you don't have a need for an appointment after all, say you finish your assignment and you turn it in advance, then you can always cancel the appointment up to 30 minutes in advance. And if in doubt, just send us a note, because things do happen. Cars break down, daycare things happen, and usually if you let us know, we're happy to say, okay, that's fine, don't worry about it. But communication is helpful. So let's talk about our main focus today, which is applying for funding. And here we'll distinguish between 3 separate things that are sometimes collated and referred to as equivalent, and sometimes they're separate. So I want to first acknowledge that there can be considerable differentiation between whether people are using these generally or specifically. But in the more specific sense, let's talk about scholarships and understand these as financial gifts that do not have to be repaid. They may have eligibility conditions such as maintaining active registration, maintaining a certain GPA, being enrolled in a specific major, but generally speaking, a scholarship does not have a service obligation or something like that, so long as you are meeting the basic criteria, usually about enrollment. Now, a fellowship, on the other hand, is generally more prestigious than scholarships, and often when you move to the graduate level, especially doctoral level, they'll start calling everything fellowships. And along with that prestige, there's usually some sort of service component. Sometimes you're writing a report, sometimes you're expected to serve as a teaching assistant or a research assistant, but generally fellowships tend to have more money associated with it. And the majority of scholarships and fellowships are coming from both institutions like schools as well as external organizations. Now, grants, the scholarships and fellowships are typically tied to a particular academic milestone, a year of enrollment, say. But a grant is more likely to be used to a sum of money that is being given for some specific purpose. For example, a conference attendance grant, or perhaps a research grant to complete a project. So if you were getting a set of funding for your dissertation, it might be worded as a grant if it was for the research component. If it's more for the act of writing, that's usually called a fellowship. But in the end of the day, I don't think you mind whether this is called a fellowship, a scholarship, or a grant, as long as you get the money that supports doing what you want to do. Now, with fellowships, we can distinguish between internal ones, which in our context means ones that are given by Abilene Christian University, versus external fellowships coming from anywhere in the rest of the world. And if we're looking at those external ones, we can look at databases that are designed to help you find those things, or websites that collate those. So I'll mention a couple popular ones. The Duke University Online Research Database, ors.duke.edu, has an excellent funding search tool. The University of California at Los Angeles also has one that they have called Grapes, with the idea being, well, you're hungry for funding, so you want to pick some grapes. The third one is a third-party, non-institutional thing, ProFellow. Now, ProFellow was actually started by one of my graduate school colleagues at Boston University. She won several major awards and found people kept asking her, how do I do that? And so now she not only collates lists of these different awards you can and should consider applying for, and it also will offer different services, resume review, application feedback, things like that some people really want. And for example, she has a whole list that she curates of different tuition-free master's programs. And if you're set, I want to go to one of those, that is a make or break thing for me, then you, of course, want to have the best application that you have. And one of the hopes for something like that is that you will see, okay, I like this. I think the people who developed this resource know their stuff, and therefore I'm willing to give them my business for this important investment in my career. Now, you can, of course, come to the Online Writing Center for feedback on that as well. But some people like to have multiple resources or have a sort of professional coach of a particular level of support beyond what we offer. So if that's what you are looking for, there are services like ProFellow that will do that for you. Now, internally, we want to start with your department and with the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. Let's take a moment and we'll open up some of these websites in turn. So before we go to the Research and Sponsored Programs, let's take a look at that Duke database. Now, you'll see that this requires access, and oftentimes these databases will have more than one way to access, where if you go in directly, if you're not logged into your account, you'll be kicked out. Sometimes they're limited to students there. Sometimes they'll show you some of the information with or without. And you can, in my case, I just signed up for an account with them, and that was great. But if we go to funding opportunities, we see that we have their funding search tools as well as their institutionally specific, and then institutionally limited, which is good to look at because those tend to be things that people don't know as well. But if you're going to apply for one, you want to get a certain set of material, like a letter of support from your chair in advance. Now, if we were to look at this, at these particular institutionally related things, we see that a lot of these have to do with government agencies where they're trying to channel the number of things. So if you're doing our Doctor of Education program, you might perhaps not be looking for USAID or NIH. But if we look and see, okay, well, education is often clustered in the social sciences. So there's this fellowship here from the Dolores Sorab Liebman Fund. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now, the page happens to take you to something where it shows you for Duke University there's that internal deadline because Duke needs to narrow it down. But it's an external thing. And so if we go to the institutional website, we see, okay, this is actually administered by JP Morgan, the financial firm. And we see, okay, graduate school fellowships, all right, attending U.S., being a U.S. citizen, so that's our first exclusion criteria here. And we see this is what they're offering. Now, the applications go out to a particular list of universities, so you want to see, is this something that you qualify? And with most awards, you will find that there's some sort of limitation that gets applied. Sometimes it's asking, sometimes it's something that's restricted to a subset. But you want to investigate sooner rather than later. Now for this particular one, if we look, we see, okay, this is actually a smaller subset here, and it does not happen to include ACU. However, if we look at this and say, okay, what we're looking for is a fellowship that supports, let's say, EDD study that I could take to ACU, then we might do some Google searching or asking the Office of Sponsored Programs for suggestions, and we'd find something like the Spencer Foundation and Dissertation Fellowship. So if we go to this one here, we see, okay, related to the improvement of education. If you're getting an EDD, you'll probably have an interest in that. And if we look through this, we can see, okay, we're off cycle for the current thing, but there's going to be a lot of forward-looking that you can do to see, all right, if this is something you want. All right, so we just passed the deadline for this year. But that means the deadline is going to fairly consistently be sometime in the early fall of next year. So if you're at the dissertation step now and you're like, well, it's probably going to take me 2 years or 3 years, okay, great. If you are just starting your coursework and you're looking and saying, okay, well, I'm not even at the dissertation stage yet, but I know I'm going to be finishing my coursework around this point and I'll be ready to apply for this at that point, then I can, with some advance notice, know, all right, I can get the transcript easily, but those letters of recommendation, to get those, I want to build a relationship with my professors and say, hey, this is my interest, this is my arc, can we be in conversation about this? So when you come to the point of asking for that letter, it's not coming out of nowhere. And so the lesson I wanted to draw here is that if you find an opportunity that you're interested in, but you are not eligible for that particular thing, keep looking around, because chances are there's going to be something similar, but targeted for someone of your particular background or educational specialty or dissertation topic. So this is one of many. Let's head back to our slides now. Now, as for the ACU Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, well, for that, we have a sorted list here, and you can see that we have some things that are targeted towards undergrads, some things that are targeted towards faculty, and some things that are targeted towards graduate students. And that this is a normal sort of distribution. And sometimes students will see something that they really want to work on, and they'll approach a faculty member saying, hey, I really want to work on this. It requires that you apply for this grant. I would like to work with you on that. Would you be willing to do that? And I've been privy to a number of projects that started like that. And it's great because you get to really shape the opportunity that you're going to work on. And usually people are working on something directly related to the professional development and leading towards their dissertation topic. Now, if we were to look through this here, we find that there's also a list of internal grant recipients. So people have gotten awards before. And something I did in my graduate studies that I would strongly encourage that you do as well is if you see someone who got an award that you want, ask them. When people send me an email saying, hey, I'm considering applying for this thing that you got, I reply to them and say, hey, you want to see an example of the application? Here you go. Because we all like to share our experience and our expertise. And for me, if someone else can benefit from seeing my application as a model, so much the better. It'd be a shame if I did all that work and it didn't benefit anyone but me. So let's go ahead and we're going to look at this and see, okay, so here's actually, they've given you a list of grant recipients and the topics they got for that. In this case, we're starting with the Cullen grant, and then there are other ones here. Now, with the examples of internal grant proposals here, you can see they've included some different examples of things that people got funding for, which may or may not overlap with what you're doing, but still gives you an idea of, okay, this is what someone wrote, and the kinds of things that met expectations. All right, so now suppose you have a particular interest like wanting to do research abroad, or you're working in international education and you want funding that will allow you to travel within your current sphere. And so you might be looking at a more specialized database like the University of Minnesota Abroad Funding Database. Now, I happen to do this for my own dissertation, and I've worked with many students at international schools who had a similar thing. So you can search by region, you can search by program type, by the subject. So for example, you might look for education here, and you might look for, let's say, let's go ahead and say non-U of M students, because I don't imagine any of you are dual enrolled at the University of Minnesota. And we see, okay, it gives us a starting point, and there are a variety of different offerings here. We can look and see if we might select this more finely. And for example, if you're looking for just something that you can do in the summer term or other short term. So let's try applying that one. And so that that particular combination isn't getting us anything. But if we switch this to summer and search, we do find several. So make sure to try more than one criteria here. Now, I do know some of my students have received DOD awards in the past to go do research on German education. It's a fabulous program, been running for many decades, very prestigious. A number of students who've done dissertation projects funded by Ford Foundation Awards. So those are a couple of the things available to you if you have a particular interest, in that case, funding that would allow you to go outside the United States. Some other things that might be of special interest if you are interested in nursing. And let's talk more about some of the things that you'd want for pretty much any fellowship application. They will almost always ask for a copy of your curriculum vitae, which, if you don't know that, it's similar in basic form to a resume, but higher levels of details. Basically, your academic life or your life record of relevant experience. And you can always make an appointment with the Writing Center to get feedback on one of those. You'll also include an application or a proposal narrative, which is basically saying, here's what I want to do. That may include the reasons why, that might be broken out into short answer. There's some sort of application form, which is almost always online these days. Often they'll ask for a sample of budget, and then a couple letters of recommendation. So as an example, for the Fulbright, I received a Fulbright Faculty Award last year to do study and research in Madagascar. They asked for a curriculum vitae. They asked for a narrative. They asked that I fill out their standard form. They would normally ask for a language evaluation, except they don't actually expect for the country I applied that you'd be speaking Malagasy, which I do now but didn't then. But because there was that optional criteria there, if I had spoken Malagasy, I could have gotten someone to do the evaluation for me. And they requested 3 letters of recommendation. Now, if you want to know what does that project statement look like, I've included an example of my verbatim project statement that I submitted. and to just look at the first couple paragraphs here, because you can delve into this more on your own time. But the first paragraph says, I hear the things that I bring to this university. I've got a lot of experience teaching and coaching graduate students. Second sentence, I'm fluent in French, I've worked with the kind of students you have, and I've lived in this part of the world. And then, and just to back this up, so I have good, strong 3 sentences to start. Say, oh yes, I've run the kind of program that they were asking for at a number of U.S. universities. So basically, the start of this project statement is designed to answer the why me, why now, why am I matched for this? And then the rest is elaborating on that with more details and experience, and you can read more about that later. Now, what people usually run into trouble with is not writing the narrative. That you do need to sit down, you do need to put some effort into it, but usually the issue is with the letters of recommendation, and specifically getting them from busy people. And so for this, the general rule of thumb is to ask at least a month in advance, people preferring 3, especially if you're asking them right before summer vacation, to follow up with the writer prior to the deadline, and to give them enough information to really be able to write the letter easily. So for example, I've listed here some of the standard things. Written out details of how you know them, like, did you work with them on this project? List of courses you may have taken with them. How long have you interacted? An up-to-date copy of the CV that they can use to remind themselves and reference specific details. Copy of the proposal draft so they know what you're trying to do and can write about how you are prepared for that and qualified for it. And if you give them several sentences or a bulleted list of the things you would like mentioned, that makes it very easy to write. Now, some letter writers will say, just give me a model, and that's fine. But it's going to be the same kind of information, just a slightly different form, like writing out paragraphs that they can use to tweak versus giving them the bulleted list of the things that they'll then write in their own words. Now, if you want to be looking for some grants in the realm of education, here are a couple of resources. We looked at the Spencer Fellowships earlier. They have a number of other awards. There are also specific ones from the Department of Education on education research. Specifically in education leadership, we can look at this, and when you're looking for something, these large databases do helpfully let you look at who has gotten these before. And in this case, we could look and say, okay, we want to look at who has gotten a grant in educational leadership and say, okay, well, my university is like this one, so let's see what they propose to do. Or you might be at a center, or you might be looking for something where you've read something by someone funded by this and you want to see what their proposal was. And you can see, we get to see their title. This is a major award. This is a multi-year endeavor. And I would say if you were going to be doing something like this, you would want to carve out, after you got it, to make sure, okay, you do your dissertation portion and then you finish. Because if you try and wait till your dissertation is done, and if you wait till you finish the whole grant to write the dissertation, you'll be waiting longer than you need to. Many things are easier if you do the dissertation first and then wrap up the project. So usually for something like this, the dissertation would be a pilot study. You can see they've given a short statement of purpose, the project activities, the outcome. You can even read this because I know some of them have been published. And you can see that they had this particular focus on 2 different school system types, Chicago Public Schools and public schools in Tennessee. And that this was exploratory. They weren't doing case control or something like that. And you can see an idea of what they were doing. They're looking at things across different sites, 3 different data types, using administrative data, data from surveys of teachers and leaders, and interview and focus group data from 3 different constituents. So we have both quantitative and qualitative data in there. And, if you wrote one of these people, they might be willing to share a copy of their application materials if you wanted to see something more in depth. I have found that most people in academia are very generous if you catch them when they're not super busy, which may involve waiting a little while for them to get back to you. All right, now we could also look at the AERA research grants. So this is another educational thing. And for this particular thing, you can see we're also off cycle. Their last deadline was for June 15th. And most organizations like this will consistently have their deadlines around the same time every year. So if you were looking at this, you could mark your calendar, say, okay, I need to be looking April 1st because I want to apply for this for June of next year. Now you notice we also have dissertation grants listed there. So if their general things interest you, you can see, okay, their dissertation grants are also due June 15th. So if there's something where you want, and the fact that they call it a dissertation grant versus a dissertation fellowship, who cares? It's money they're offering, and if you get it, you get the money. Now, they happen to be looking for proposals encouraging them particularly relevant to STEM policy and practice, but that is not purely limited to that. You can see that they have some other topics that they are specifically interested in, including these ones here, which would align with, in between those things, the vast majority of EDD dissertations that I've seen at ACU would fit into this category here. Now, looking at this, we see that it's a 1-year reward for people at the dissertation writing stage. You need to be a U.S. citizen or U.S. permanent resident enrolled in a doctoral program. And if you're a non-U.S. citizen, but you're going to ACU, you're also eligible. So make sure to read all of the criteria, because if you just read this sentence, you might think, oh, I'm an international student, I'm not allowed. But here we see, oh, if you're enrolled in a U.S. doctoral program, yes, you are eligible. So with that in mind, let us now look at this other helpful thing they have, because many of these organizations are devoted to the advancement of the field, and so they'll do helpful things like, in this case, AERA has its external fellowship and funding opportunities note. So if you're interested in their stuff, they say, well, you might be interested in one of these other things. And you'll see that, for example, the American Association of University Women, that came up in one of the earlier things. If you're doing math, you might be interested in that. NECS has a lot of stuff about analyzing data. And so by looking at these, you can get a great idea of what sorts of places you should be marking on your calendar. If you like the AER mission and you see, okay, there are these pockets here that they're recommending that we look, awesome. So organizations can be a great point of reference for similar projects, because if they're devoted to the advancement of the field, even if it's not through them, they want you to keep doing the work that you're doing. There are also some resources for K-12 education research specifically that I've listed here. We're going to pass over these for reasons of time, but I encourage you to check them out. And if you're applying for a grant proposal for funding to do a research project, it's going to be grossly similar to what we had before. But let's look at that breakdown. You're usually going to have a letter of inquiry or cover letter, a summary of what you propose to do, a list of the things that qualify you or your group to do those things, a problem or need statement, basically saying here's what we're addressing or what we're trying to solve, a program description saying here's what we're going to be doing, because you're not going to solve all of that project, but you're going to address some portion of it, and how you're going to know if you've succeeded. That's the evaluation plan. You may also be asked for a financial plan. Generally, the larger the amount of money, the more they ask for that, as well as the budget, including telling us what your institution might be waiving or a partner might be waiving. And sometimes they'll ask for samples of previous work or literature you've published or something like that, depending on the grant. Some of the common places where people run into trouble, besides delaying on writing the recommendation errors, delaying on requesting letters of recommendation, a very common one is just not allowing enough time to write and rushing everything. If you're planning out a year-long project, probably you want to put some thought into that and let that ferment. If you don't give them the information that they ask for in particular sections, that can definitely derail your application. Quality of writing helps. This is something where many opportunities are now guiding the readers, saying, hey, we want you to look past grammatical issues and focus on the content, but being able to communicate clearly what you want to do, and doing that in a compelling fashion is always helpful. So make sure to proofread, and you can always come to the Writing Center for help with an application. Another one, not conveying to your reviewers the research is interesting, exciting, that it meets an important need. And that's something that usually gets people who are working in the field, and so you know what the conditions are on the ground, you're passionate about it, but the people reading don't necessarily know those things. So, you might tell us, well, there's a high dropout rate. Well, tell us what the repercussions of, and even someone who doesn't know anything about teaching will realize, oh, yes, you're talking about major differences in people's lives, whether they get this degree or not and are able to proceed. So that is kind of thing that you want to make sure you have written out in some explicit thing why this is important, why this is of interest, why their organization should be funding and backing it. Some other things, a lack of preliminary data or research. Basically, how do you know that this is a good idea to do? And that can take many different forms. But one of those is just to show us that there is some reason for you to be doing inquiry. Did you do a pilot study? Did you ask your colleagues and they recommended this? Does the literature say this should be done next? You also want to make sure that your project is of appropriate scale. What can reasonably be done in a year for a dissertation award? If it's a 3-year grant, how much money are they giving you? Are you able to hire other people? Would it just be you? Lack of experience in the field. Usually people who go after those major grants have gotten smaller ones before because it helps demonstrate their ability to complete the projects. You also want to avoid selecting a project that will have a very limited impact. And a lot of that is just going back to number 5 and telling us why that is interesting, why that is important. So making sure that you articulate that. And then limited support from your institution. So this takes more of a dimension when you are collecting your letters of recommendation and you don't have one from your current school, or if you are saying this project will be hosted at your university and you're getting charged full market rate for things. Well, if it's something your university is doing, often they will offer discounts or certain space for free or other administrative resources. And so when you're doing together your budget, make sure you allow enough time to document those things in writing so that it's clear to show you are getting supported by this. Do recommend this resource here. Now, on the old adage of it takes some to get some, the best thing that I can recommend if you're writing an application for funding for the first time is to look at a couple examples. This is something that really helped me in my own journey, and that my students swear that if you have an idea of what's expected, it helps narrow what you're thinking about, what you're pondering. And so many opportunities will give you samples of that, as we've seen with, say, the databases. But in this case, I'm going to echo my earlier suggestion of asking people who have won awards that you want, especially if they're at your university. They've gotten it already. Usually you are ineligible to do it for some number of years after, even if it's a repeating thing. So like, for example, I was a Fulbrighter last year. I need to take 2 years off from that. So anyone who's applying for a Fulbright this year or next is not in competition with me because of that. So here is an example of a grant application. There, I applied for the American Musicological Society's Janet Levy Fund. Here's a description of the requirements for that. You can see that they ask for a narrative describing the project and its importance for my career, budget, curriculum vitae, and a letter of recommendation. And you can see I have included a copy of my narrative here. I've included a copy of my budget. By the way, when you're doing these, do use the spreadsheet tool and have it automatically add things up. It saves a lot of mathematical errors. And, with this, I'll say, what kind of takeaways might you have? Well, if you see approximately what someone wrote for something and see the kind of spacing, it's easy to see, okay, where can I start jotting in the kinds of details that they're asking for, or what do I need to collect for that? You can also see what is reasonable budget expenditure. You always want to see what's approved or not. But in this case, you can see for this, my particular budget involved getting around Paris. I was using a transit pass and therefore being more economical. And one of the ways I made my budget work was showing, a friend was going to host me in Paris. And so because of that, I had, this is like the equivalent of institutional support. I have someone else who's helping with that and also presents a rational budget. Because otherwise, without that, it would be very unreasonable to try and do all of this while paying for a Paris hotel within this grant sum. But with that, I was able to explain in the notes there that, this is something that I have available that I'm making use of, and so I'm showing a certain attention to detail that is always helpful. If we look at the last paragraph, we can see that I'm talking about timeliness and that there is something where there's opportunity that did not previously exist, and saying, I've been in correspondence with these people. That is one of those things that you might think goes without saying and not think to include, but it always helps to show you have done your due diligence, just like in the earlier list here, showing that you have experience in the field and that there is a baseline for you to be able to do this. Okay, why is this interesting? We can also be, why is this important now? And so whenever you're applying for something, keep that in mind. What ways can you make your case that this is important to do, why this is important for you to do, and why this is important to do now? So, hope that's helpful. Any questions? Feel free to send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@ACU, and have a great rest of your day.